Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Our story today is about the Women of ENIAC, the 6 women who helped program that machine we talked about that had been made at the University of Pennsylvania by Presper Eckert and John Mauchly. There's John Mauchly right in the middle, leaning against the post, Presper Eckert playing with the dials, and behind them is a woman, and her name is Jean Jennings. Jean Jennings. Remember that name? She's one of the 6 women of ENIAC. She was born in Alanthus Grove, Missouri, a town of 104 population, except for when she left, it became 103. Her father taught in a one-room schoolhouse. Her mother helped tutor the kids in the neighborhood in algebra, even though her mother was a 8th grade dropout. Her mother had learned math so she could help teach it. Jean was the star pitcher, in fact, the only girl on the school softball team. And there were 7 children, and she was the 6th one in her family. All of them went to college. In particular, she went to a college called Northwest State Teachers College in Missouri. The tuition was about $76 a year. That was back when America really appreciated the value of everybody being able to get an education, to be able to afford a higher education. It was, as we were leading into World War II, and we knew that our success would depend on an educated population. Northwest State College still exists. The tuition is now $14,000 a year for in-state students. Jean Jennings at first wanted to study journalism, but she didn't like her advisor, and she realized, or she felt, that math was more interesting. It was more exciting. And she became pretty good at math, very good at math. And when she graduated, her teacher showed her a flyer that had been sent to the Teachers College. And it was a flyer that was sort of a help wanted ad. It said, wanted women with degrees in mathematics. Women are being offered scientific and engineering jobs where formerly men were preferred. In other words, no women wanted for a while in those type of jobs. But now, as we headed towards World War II, they were looking for women, especially women in science and math. So the ad said, now is the time to consider your job in science and engineering. You will find that the slogan there is, women wanted. Well, she sent off her application, and one day she got a telegram from a group at the University of Pennsylvania saying, come join us, you're going to be hired. She had never left the state of Missouri, but when she got the telegram, she boarded that next day the midnight Wabash Express to Pennsylvania. Needless to say, she said, they were shocked that I got there so quickly. She becomes part of what are called the computers. Back then, the phrase computers was used to refer to people who did calculations. They computed things such as the missile trajectories. And almost all of the computers in the room at the University of Pennsylvania were women. And they did the calculations on the blackboard and on paper. And they were called the computers. But eventually, 6 of them got tapped. 6 of them got tapped to be part of a secret program that was going to make it so that you didn't have to do those calculations on paper. You could do it on the machine that John Mauchly and Presper Eckert were building behind locked doors at the Moore School of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. The 6 women were Jean Jennings, the woman we talked about, upper left, Marilyn Westkoff, Ruth Litterman, Betty Snyder, Frances Billas, and Kay McNulty. And they get sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, which was a base, an Army artillery base, where they could be secretly trained in how to understand the engineering of this new computer that was being built. They had a wonderful time. I've always thought it would make a great movie. In fact, I've pitched this movie, but nobody's picked it up. Of the 6 women of ENIAC, when they get to the Aberdeen Proving Ground, they're put in cabins together and they meet a lot of young Army recruits, Army enlisted men, and they each have wonderful boyfriends. One of them, I think Jean Jennings, found a boyfriend from Biloxi, Mississippi. They had a favorite drink, which was a Tom Collins. I think it's made out of gin and some lime and soda or whatever. And they would drink Tom Collinses in the mess hall there with their boyfriends. But they also got to know each other very well. And they had never come into contact, close contact with anybody from any other religion. This is Jean Jennings talking. But despite our differences, or perhaps because of them, we really liked each other. So as I picture these 6 women of ENIAC, drinking Tom Collins, having wonderful love affairs with enlisted men at Aberdeen Proving Ground, is like one of those old World War II platoon movies with men, where there's people of each ethnic and racial background. And that's what these 6 women were. At one point, they decide, Presper Eckert and John Mauchly, that they're going to demonstrate for the public, ENIAC. This is after the women had figured out all the cabling and the programming. And so these women set about figuring out how are you going to do missile trajectories, but other things, such as weather, but especially a secret one, which was how to figure out the atom bomb and how it would explode. And at one point, Jean Jennings is working in her office upstairs with one of the other women of ENIAC, and John Mauchly walks in. They'd never met Mauchly before. He'd stayed behind the locked doors on the ground floor. But he walked in because there was some problem with the roof. And he says, "Hi, my name is John Mauchly. I was just checking to see if the ceiling is falling in." And Jean Jennings said to him, "Boy, are we glad to see you. Tell us how this blasted accumulator works." In other words, how does this part of the machine that accumulates memory of numbers work? And Mauchly answered the questions, talked to the 2 women, and said, "Well, my office is next door. So anytime I'm in my office, just come by and ask questions." And they started to do so almost every afternoon. They would meet with Mauchly and he would teach them about the machine. When they were doing the preparation for this demonstration for when they were going to take ENIAC public, John Mauchly knew it was going to be really important to get it right. And at one point, he came by the room with Jean Jennings and her friends and brought a bottle of apricot brandy. I don't know why he thought that would help them figure out the mathematics faster for the demonstration, but Jennings loved it. She said it was delicious, and from that day forward, I always kept a bottle of apricot brandy in my cupboard. What they did was they tried to do a demonstration of missile trajectory. And the night before they were supposed to do it, they still had one glitch in the program because it would perfectly calculate the trajectory of the missile. But then when the missile was supposed to hit the ground, it would keep calculating. It would keep doing the numbers and calculate the trajectory even after it had hit the target. And finally, Jean Jennings, Bartik, and others figured out a way, staying up late at night, how to make sure that there was a zero function that turned it off at the right point. It was an absolutely successful demonstration. Page 1 of the New York Times. And here's the inside page of the New York Times. It shows the picture of them working on ENIAC. They showed it off to all of the press, and they said it was a machine that would think. But like Ada Lovelace, Jean Jennings didn't think that machines would be able to actually think. She thought they would be able to do what we programmed them to do, not come up with ideas on their own. So like Ada Lovelace, she says for the story, the ENIAC wasn't a brain in any sense. It couldn't reason, as computers still cannot reason, but it could give people more data for reasoning. That evening after the demonstration, there was a beautiful gala dinner. It was held in Houston Hall, one of the great halls at Penn, by candlelight, an old-fashioned hall. There were all sorts of dignitaries, generals from the Army, top politicians came. And it was February 14th. It was Valentine's Day. But Jean Jennings and the other women who had programmed it, they weren't invited to the dinner. And years later, they still felt insulted that they were just considered clerical people who had done the programming. But that began to change when John Mockley and Presper Eckert left Penn, and they took the idea for ENIAC and started a company called UNIVAC, a company that is still in various incarnations around today. Unisys, Barry Rand, started as UNIVAC. And they realized then that the hardware wasn't the big thing. The big thing was the software. So Jean Jennings, now Jean Jennings Bartik, she's there on the right. That's her holding vacuum tubes and the circuit board there. She gets hired to help do the programming of UNIVAC. And for the company, all of the people who had worked, all the women who had worked on ENIAC get hired by Presper Eckert and John Mockley. And they hired Grace Hopper too, the woman who had done the programming of the Mark I up at Harvard. John Mockley also tried to hire one of the six, Kay McNulty, but he ended up proposing marriage to her. So even though she helped program the machine, she also became his wife and one of the co-founders of UNIVAC. So that's the story. They're wonderful people, the six women of UNIVAC. They lived to a ripe old age. And if you Google them, you can find a lot of videos of them talking about how they helped discover, writing new programs like COBOL and others, that it wasn't the hardware that would distinguish a machine. It was the software that would be most important. And finally, they got their due in history.